Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Stargirl Season 2, Episodes 12 and 13, which are Summer School Chapters 12 and 13. Although, honestly, probably mostly just the finale. I don't see me mentioning too much about Episode 12. It's the unfortunate part of doing two together like this, is that the first one of the two tends to get the shaft, but even more so when we're dealing with the last two episodes, because most of what I want to talk about really is the finale and the season as a whole and how it wrapped things up. One of the things I was feeling getting into this finale actually was that we had probably the best action sequence of the entire show. And I think it was episode 7 was the school fight where Eclipso first kind of properly appeared physically. That really was a peak. That was the peak of the season, I think. I think it's the best episode of the season. Not to put the finale down, that makes it sound like I'm going to rag on the finale. I think the finale is mostly really enjoyable. I do have a couple of critiques and a couple of complaints of a few hollow elements, but I was feeling kind of the drought afterwards. I think the fighting in season 1 was very well paced out. The action scenes were good, but paced out evenly, so it was every 2 or 3 episodes you got a really cool scene or so. And this season, I felt like we had a couple of decent ones early on, then we had the best one they'd ever given us in episode 7, and I did kind of feel the drought going into the finale. I was like, oh yeah, we're kind of due some good action, because we've not really had much since that episode. Which is just to say that I think if I'm looking at the season overall, in terms of comparing to season 1, I think I prefer Eclipso as a villain to Icicle, and perhaps Brainwave as well, but I mean mainly I'm comparing the main villains. I prefer Eclipso, and I think that the peak of this season, which is at episode 7, is probably my favourite episode of the show, so I think that's better than anything that was in season 1. However, I do think I like season 1 as a whole more than season 2. I think season 1 is a bit more well balanced, it's paced out a little bit better, and was a bit more, I think the emotional center of it, which was kind of Pat and Courtney's relationship, which culminated with her actually referring to herself as his daughter. I think that was a better through line in season 1 versus season 2, which I really like kind of the point it makes here at the end about her inner character, her hope, her happiness, who she is, her fire, kind of winning out, and that's ultimately what defeats Eclipso, and that's a really nice sentiment. It fits into the themes of the show and all that, but I don't think it was as well set up this season as much as the key conflict was last season. I mean, they did a lot this season about Eclipso working his way through the characters to get to Courtney. It turns out in the finale and the build up to it that he kind of wants to get to Courtney because that'll let him control the light. If he can use Courtney as a host, he will have control of the staff as well as his normal power, and that's end of all times and doom for everyone if he succeeds in that. But yeah, so season 1 I think better overall, but season 2 with some higher highs, but a bit more uneven overall, I think. So which is to say that I did enjoy the finale. I think if I have critiques about the finale, it's probably that there's a few moments that they have a lot of characters who come in. There's a lot of different elements that come in. There's no way I'm going to talk about them all in the correct order, because there's no way I'm going to remember exactly that. But you have Mike showing up in Stripe with Jakeem, with Thunderbolt. You have Rick showing up without the hourglass. He doesn't fix that, but he does show up with Grundy, and that's kind of a big moment. Grundy dies. You have Cindy working side by side with both Yolanda and Courtney, and they feel like a little sort of girl power team in this, the middle of the fight. I think my critique I'd have with all of this is that most of the bits individually are really good, but there was definitely moments as certain elements were playing out that I kind of felt like some of the other groups were just kind of standing around doing nothing. There was a whole section early on where Yolanda is fighting the original Wildcat, Ted Grant. Not really him, obviously, just Eclipso making her think she's fighting him, but she's fighting him, and Cindy's fighting a young version of herself, which I thought was hilarious, actually. I thought it was kind of hilarious how both of these fights had something kind of silly in terms of their pairings. With Wildcat, it was the fact that this burly man is beating up a teenage girl, but with Cindy's side of things, it was like Cindy beating up like, you know, a 12-year-old, but taking it very seriously. And I think what was so funny about it to me is that with the Wildcat side, it makes sense that the bigger, meaner one is the bad guy, and in the context of the fight, because we're rooting for the underdog. But it was really funny that in the Cindy side of things, we're rooting for the one who's bigger. We're rooting for the teenager against the little girl. And that was really funny to me. But while this was going on, I really did think, what the hell's Courtney doing during all this? She's just kind of around. And then likewise, it kind of felt like Courtney and some of the others were just missing for a while whilst all the Stripe stuff was going on, whilst the Grundy stuff was going on. It kind of felt like certain characters were just missing, or just kind of waiting for their cue at certain points. And I guess the other hollow thing that I'll say is I love that the Crocs show up. I love that both the parents and Artemis show up to help. However, their inclusion feels a little bit like, I don't know, tacked on, because they don't really achieve anything. Like, Eclipse was already down. They kind of shoot him with a couple of things, but it doesn't really affect anything. If they didn't show up, they'd still win. You know, it's all the characters who have light powers are the ones who kind of do their thing. Obviously, Starman's there, and don't worry, I love the group shot. I love the group shot with Starman, with the original Dr. Midnight. The Shade's back, which I'm glad he's back because I like him being around. His death was, you know, I was kind of with Dr. Midnight in this scene though, where I'm like, yeah, your death scene was pretty good. I don't know if I kind of necessarily like the idea of you coming back, but at the same time, his presence being around for next season does seem like a fun idea. We do have a lot of characters though now. That is the one thing, and especially now that we have the Crocs as regulars and they're going to be living next door, which I love. Like, obviously, I love that. You know, I love their interaction with the Whitmores. I'm all for it. I'm all for that thing, and it, you know, I like that at the end it says next season is called Frenemies. It's coming next year, and we get our like sort of post-title scene to kind of tease that. And you know, it's exactly what I was saying earlier in the season when they introduced the Helix stuff and they brought up Mr. Bones. I was like, okay, we're like that's season 3 stuff. There's no way we're dealing with that in season 2. So sure enough, that's just a little seed that we can plant for next season. And I did recognize Keith David's voice as Mr. Bones, which is cool. I don't know if it's the voice that I don't think it's remotely close to the voice that I think I had in my head whenever I read comics, but obviously that's just, I think my instincts with Mr. Bones in the comics was that he probably had more of like a Lance Henriksen kind of like craggy, like skinny man kind of voice. I don't know. Whereas Keith David's got a very sort of, you know, very commanding voice. He sounds like a really smart voice. So it's a little bit different from what I expect, but that's not. The only critique I have of Bones is that his head does look a bit weird. In the comics, he does have like this cyanide touch, so no one can touch him. And I guess this coating over the skull is kind of supposed to like sort of be the cyanide like part, I guess, but it was a bit weird looking. But I'm excited for Bones. And I enjoy, as much as I critique some of the waiting around for the fight stuff, I thought some of the stuff with Yolanda and Cindy working together looked really fun. Grundy showing up to help was a great moment, and the tease, of course, that he can come back, because anyone who knows the comics knows that Grundy's whole thing is that he was born on a Monday, dies on a Sunday, and like over and over again. So it's not the end for Grundy by any means. Jakeem, we get to see more of him in this. Well, these 2 episodes more than we ever have, with interacting with Mike. I think their chemistry is pretty solid. I kind of like that Mike's got a buddy now that they can, you know, bounce off of each other. That's fun stuff. Zeke as well, eating all the Chinese food that Thunderbolt brought back whilst giving advice to Mike. Like, all this stuff is really fun. Again, there's maybe a slight concern that there's going to be like so many characters next season. Now that we're keeping the Shade around, and we have the Crocs, and we have Zeke, and we have all these characters, and it sounds like Starman is going to be around to train Courtney for at least a little bit next season. You know, he's going to stick around. He promises he's not taking the staff. He helps kind of inspire her and like say, no, if the staff chose you, it was for a reason. You've got the power to fight Eclipso from the inside, and inspires her to do so. And, you know, I did like all of the light-based characters, you know, Green Lantern, Courtney, and Thunderbolt all blasting with the different colors. Like that was like a fun visual. Obviously, when it's these big action scenes in these shows, the CG can sort of falter at points, and there was a moment where Grundy was fighting CG Eclipso and it looked a bit goofy, or there's a moment where Eclipse was like climbing up the outside of the building and it looks a little bit iffy. There's a few things like that. I kind of appreciate it though. I did get a big kick out of the giant chainsaw and Stripe though, I have to say. That worked for me. I mean, I'm not saying it looked completely realistic, but like the close up of like the giant like chainsaw and like Eclipso holding it, I thought was a fun visual. So while I do have some like nitpicks of like some of the fighting parts feeling a little like redundant, like the Croc showing up and firing a couple of things at Eclipso while he's already down, which is right before they use all the light anyway, just kind of felt like, okay, you got your big entrance, but it didn't really amount to anything. It almost felt like more of the entrances could have been like used when characters were in trouble. Like, I don't know, maybe it's a bit more cliched to do it that way, but like, if you have a character show up right as someone else is about to be defeated, that could be a big moment, and it could for some of them it kind of felt like the previous fight ended and then that was their cue to come in, as opposed to they jump in and save the previous person who's now down for a little bit and they can fight. And that's a bit conventional as well, don't get me wrong, like maybe that'd be a bit by the numbers, but I think it would have worked better than this weirder kind of just compartmentalized thing they did instead. So, and not that there was none of that, but for the most part it was the stuff. It got a little dark at times, threatening to break Pat's arm. The way Grundy was killed felt like a vicious sort of like, oh, Eclipso's got a lot of power kind of thing. And speaking of Pat, the one thing that we probably should really mention from the previous episode is Pat's convincing of Rick's uncle to drop the charges. He had what I'm going to call a Ripper moment. For if you don't get what I mean by that, is was a Giles in Buffy, the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was the father figure to her, in the same way that Pat is to Courtney. And he was a very nice person, a very nice character, but he did have this darker past, and he did occasionally let this darker side come out when there needed to be a darker character. This made me think more than anything. There's a couple of darker moments, don't get me wrong, but it made me think of him threatening to beat up Principal Snyder to let Buffy back into school in season 3 of Buffy. And we don't see what happens here exactly, but Pat just sort of talks about he opens up and tells Rick's uncle what he thinks of him, that he's a prick and that he's been an awful father figure and all these other things. Which is all true, and it's actually kind of cathartic to have Pat, a character who mostly tries to be as nice as possible, just come out with all this. But then he shuts the blinds and talks about how he has a dark side to him as well. And then all of a sudden, Rick is released from jail, and it's like, oh boy, he went dark, and he may have tortured a man in a hospital bed. Definitely an interesting turn for Pat himself. You could read that as Eclipso's affecting the whole town, getting to him as well, and he's tapping into this, and that maybe makes it more uplifting that Courtney was able to sort of fight him off. And even after she said she hated Eclipso, like, inside, like, yes, we all have the ability to hate, but we can all be pushed to hate something, that's possible, but she was able to fight back and find the inner light and happiness and hope and yada 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 and win. And maybe that's another example of that. And it's nice having all the characters come back. I love that Cindy wants to be a part of the JSA and goes to Yolanda to like ask her first. Like, Courtney might be the one who's the leader technically, but Yolanda's going to have to be on board with it, so she goes to her first. And I like that she does it without, like, she still sounds like Cindy. She doesn't just say like, oh, I effed up and I did all these bad things and it was really wrong and bad. She acknowledges that she was wrong. She said that they have to fight darkness with more darkness. You have to fight evil with bad, right, to beat Eclipso. And she was wrong, and she admits that and says, that makes you think a little bit, but she doesn't outright say that her entire philosophy's been wrong. She says that Yolanda got a pass for doing something bad, so should she, even though, I mean, Cindy was clearly gunning for much worse than Yolanda ever did, but she sort of phrases it in this kind of like, you got a pass, so should I, which is a lot less graceful and a bit more ham-fisted than you could with like an apology or a sort of a asking for acceptance or friendship. But it felt true to Cindy to sort of kind of go down this path, but in her own voice and in her own, bad girl kind of way. So I'm all for her, and it was, that fits into the theme between, I think, Cindy and Artemis probably both kind of being on the team next season. We're going to have this real vibe of different characters. But like I say, the shot of like everyone lining up, it was basically the Avengers moment, right, where Loki's on the ground and they're all standing above him. It was basically that, but we had multiple characters from the original JSA. We had all the kids now who are together. It really felt like we've grown what the JSA is and can be this season. I will say there's a few elements in the season that feel like they just kind of like took a back seat or weren't as focused on as it felt like they were going to be. When it cut to Cameron late in the episode, I was like, oh yeah, Cameron exists. Like he was in like a dream sequence, or like, the fake Cameron was there attacking Mike for an episode, and that was a good moment, but like actual Cameron we've not seen in a while, and it's like, oh, I guess him discovering his ice powers is more of a season 3 thing. And on the one hand, I actually kind of respect that they didn't like feel the need to try and squeeze more of it in just for the sake of having more of it. But at the same time, I kind of felt like, well, you could have just like ended the season with him like noticing his ice powers. We didn't necessarily have to spend as much time in him this season. That said, that swerve where we thought he was attacking Mike at the same time as his father coming back, that did work quite well, and maybe that wouldn't have worked if we hadn't spent a little bit of time with him first to set up that he could be like in this place. Likewise, Starman showing up. This is just a structural thing, but when Starman showed up, it was okay, we've been expecting this, but it made me realize like how weirdly spaced out the scenes with him were. There was 2 scenes with Starman looking for Pat, but they were both in the first like few episodes of the season, and I'm like, why was that one at the like? You can either you can do it 2 ways. You can either have one scene of him at the very start of the season, and then it's bookended with him showing up at the end of the season, right? And that would work. But that's not what happened. We got a scene with them in the first episode, and then there was a scene at the diner where he talks to the waitress. That was like episode 3 or 4 or something like that. And then nothing until this finale. And I know we've seen Joel McHale, we've seen him in flashbacks and stuff like that, but it felt really weird to me, like how quickly that like we stopped teasing that, and then like I felt like there should have been another tease or push the diner scene up to closer to the finale or something. It felt really weirdly paced to me, that element. So yeah, a couple of nitpicks about some pacing things, and maybe just pacing in general. The back half of the season, I think, like it peaked with episode 7, and I think the finale is one of the better episodes of the season. It's definitely got a lot of exciting things in it, and I'm excited about all the characters. Well, I think there might be too many of them. I am excited for a lot of the characters that are going to be interacting still next season, so that's all good stuff. But yeah, definitely I felt a bit of a weird pacing hit. Beth has the ironic ending where now her parents are like kind of back together because they know she's a superhero and they're excited to like be obsessed with her, and for the first time she actually wishes they weren't obsessed with her. She looks kind of scared at the thought of them never like leaving her alone. So it's kind of an ironic, be careful what you wish for thing with Beth, which was nice enough. Dr. Midnight passes a torch to her and goes off to find his wife and a son that he never knew he had, which is, cool stuff. There's a lot of torch passing, kind of going on, and that's all very nice too. But yeah, I don't have like super hot takes. I think some of the storytelling's a little clunkier, in the back half of the season in particular. It does kind of feel like it does kind of feel like Yolanda, for example, just was gone for a while, which is good because it kind of sells like she was serious about giving the team up and not being Wildcat. But I don't know if it really felt like she had a moment in the finale. Like she says at the end of the episode when they ask her, hey, are you back for good? And she's like, yeah, I'm back. And they kind of have this moment. I don't know if I had a clear enough moment between her and Cindy or her and Wildcat OG fake, in her head, Wildcat. Like, I don't know if we had a moment that felt like she kind of like realized she was back or whatever. Like, it didn't really. Like, she went to try and help Courtney when Courtney looked she was in trouble, and I do like the idea that everyone around Courtney, when Courtney was possessed by Eclipso for the brief moment that she was, like, I do kind of like that everyone was gunning to help her, right? That was kind of important to everyone to try and save Courtney. Sort of cementing that she is kind of at the center in terms of that she's the heart of the entire group, that she brought everyone together. And I think Pat even raises that idea that she brought everyone, she convinced Yolanda to come. She was willing to let Cindy be involved, and so all of it is very, very functional, which I know sounds like a really backhanded compliment. It's just not as tight as season 1 was overall, and that's okay. That's okay. It can be a little shakier. Many a good show has had an uneven season 2, and I think this is an uneven season 2 compared to season 1, but does have some higher highs, but also has some lower lows, which actually reminds me of a few shows. This is a much better show overall, right? But Mr. Robot actually had a very similar thing, where season 2 of Mr. Robot was definitely a bit messier and definitely was paced a bit poorer than season 1, but did have some high highs. And then season 3 went on to be even better than either season. So there's a lot to still feel very positive about, and so yeah. Good season, but not as good as season 1, and but great villain. Some good new characters, that I'm just okay on. Like Green Lantern, I think she's a little bit. She feels a little bit weak so far to me, and it might just partly because I think the actress is a little bit weaker than the rest of the cast, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm all for Cindy on Team JSA, try to be a good character, and but having the almost the Drax-esque, more blunt suggestions of, we should just break someone's kneecaps, and then everyone looks at her and she's like, okay, fine, we won't do the bad thing. I could sense a lot of that playing out next season, and I'm totally cool with that. And I'm cool for Bones being involved. I kind of like that the villain next season and the villain plot that we're setting up with Helix and Bones is that they're coming to the town because of all the characters that are already there, as opposed to something happening because the town's important, or as opposed to something happening by circumstance or happenstance. Obviously, it was Cindy who opened the Pandora's box, as it were, by bringing the diamond out. But I kind of like that this time. It's no. This town now has a bunch of heroes in it, teenage heroes, and a bunch of villains as well. What's going on? This is weird. I like that that's attracting attention from a group that deals with superpowered individuals, and feels like a very natural way to bring in a third season storyline. So I really appreciate that. So that's cool. But yeah, I think that's all I've got. I don't have, because most of this final episode is fighting. Good fighting for the most part, but it is mostly fighting. And episode 12 was perfectly fine, but it was very much a setup episode. That really felt like it was there to just get everything in place for the finale, which again is perfectly fine, but it is a lot less interesting to talk about. So I almost lucked out by skipping that week in terms of actually giving it a review, although that was not a planned thing. That was just life getting in the way, and there was some flooring being put down in the house mixed with some end of month deadlines that I had it meant that it just wasn't happening. But it's interesting that it worked out this way. But I do feel bad when each episode doesn't get its full due. But there you go. That's the Stargirl finale of season 2. I'm looking forward to season 3. But I definitely felt a little bit of a dip in quality overall in the back half of the season. So that's a bit of a shame, but it's it's not like a huge. It's not a huge dip. It's just but you feel it a little bit. So hopefully season 3 can be firing on all cylinders, and we can have fun with these characters again. But let me know what you thought of season 3. Oh, not season 3. We've not had season 3 yet. Let me know what you thought of season 2 of Stargirl in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe and all that stuff. And you can get us on Twitter at mail_fudge for channel updates. As far as shows that are being reviewed soon, obviously Chucky is going on. I've been reviewing that, and that's been getting better as it goes, so that's neat. That's got 4 episodes so far. And I'm also be trying a bunch of pilots this month. We're looking at Hawkeye, we're looking at Wheel of Time, big fantasy show. I don't think I'm going to like that, but I'm trying it. I've tried it. The Patreon's the band I try it, so I try it. As well as the Cowboy Bebop show, and again, I don't really want to watch the new Dexter because Dexter got terrible, but I will be trying the first episode of the new Dexter reboot show. So, you know, lots of things to try, so check out some of that stuff. But otherwise, that is me. But also check out Patreon, of course. Patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. For as little as $1 per month, you can support everything, keep all the content coming. And check out MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts go to live. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?